Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
Chris, everyone, this is Chris Placitella. When I think of top lawyers in New Jersey, I think of Chris. Chris has been around a long time. He's been in some of the biggest mass tort, class action type cases over the years. Also, you did a lot of work in asbestos, right?
That's how I started.
Yeah.
Still do it.
Yeah. I first met Chris. I was, who's the lawyer in Georgia? What's his name?
Morgan?
What's that?
Dan Morgan? Morgan and
No,
Morgan?
Ball and Keenan.
Oh, David Ball.
Don Keenan.
Don
Oh, yeah.
So Don Keenan always says when I was a puppy lawyer. So I met Chris, I met you when I was a puppy lawyer on this Ciba-Geigy case. I was working as a new associate in a plaintiff's firm. And I first saw you in action taking a deposition of a corporate representative of Ciba-Geigy. And I thought it was really cool to see, how you would do things and how you were able to, how well prepared you were. And that was an environmental water contamination case. And it was also funny because I remember you had one of your sons there with you. You might have had both of your sons, Gerald and Justin, and that was cool too. So I super thank you for coming here. We feel honored that you're here.
Kind.
Lawyers don't have a lot of time. Time's tight, and we rescheduled this thing several times.
Yeah, sorry about that.
There's nothing. It's funny because we were supposed to start at 10, and you said 10:30, and I was like, thank God, because I'm the same way. So I super appreciate you coming here.
Oh, that's great. I remember that deposition. I remember the corporate rep saying, I'll never forget, I almost fell over. He said, "You couldn't pay me to swim in the Tom's River."
Yeah, that was just so that people know. Ciba-Geigy was a large chemical manufacturer, and they had a large plant in Dover, New Jersey, also known as Toms River, New Jersey. And one of my first experiences in document reviews was going to the Ciba-Geigy facility in this warehouse, and we were just going through old, moldy documents. And I think that it's a super fun site. There was a lot of environmental contamination found. There was also cancer clusters in Toms River, which I believe some experts in the litigation linked to some of the benzene and other chemicals that were in the soil there. And I remember one of the most, it's a funny story because when I was in college, I was like super conservative. I've told this story before. I remember I think it was the 92 campaign, and I was at Villanova. I think I was like a sophomore or something. And when they announced that Clinton beat Bush on campus, there was no, like you could hear throughout the campus, everyone was upset. So I was like super kind of conservative in college, and then I interned for Bob Dole in college. And then I wanted to become a lawyer because I wanted to end all these frivolous lawsuits. That's actually why I became a lawyer. And I clerked for Judge D'Amico in Monmouth County, and he kind of turned me to kind of see a different way. And there's different markers in my career where, like, because when you're kind of young and idealistic, you have these ideas, and then it takes time as you grow up to see what the world is really like and kind of really understand. And we're learning every day. I'm certainly learning every day. But as a lawyer, there's certain markers in my career that I remember. One of them was taking the deposition as a defense lawyer of a guy that was paralyzed, and I was asking him all these dumb questions to try to get him as little money as possible, which I never felt great about. Another marker in my career is when I got a case dismissed, and I felt great about it until I didn't anymore. I said, what did I really do other than screw a guy out of a recovery? And then the other marker in my career is when I was reviewing the Ciba-Geigy documents, and I realized that the reason they came to Toms River, this was in their documents, was because of the sandy soil. It was easiest to dump their chemicals there because it could then go into the sandy soil and proliferate out into the ocean and into the Toms River. And I was just completely shocked by that. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Chris, like in your career, and I'm talking too much, so Mark interrupt me, but Rick Freeman, he gives this talk to Harvard law students. I think one of his sons or something, or his daughter was there as a Harvard law student, and he gives this talk to them about, it's kind of like a pitch for them to become plaintiffs' lawyers. And one of the things he talks about is like a parade of horribles, like the Ford Pinto case and the tobacco litigation and the asbestos litigation, this kind of parade of corporate horribles that's resulted in, just terrible injury and death to people. And you being in mass torts, you live that stuff. I mean, you've litigated those cases and you continue to do so. That's one thing I'd like to talk about, But, and I'm going to shut up now. But Chris, can you tell us, because being such like a successful lawyer and stuff, and being one of the best known lawyers in the state and certainly nationally in the mass tort, for kids that are kind of coming up, maybe kids in college trying to pick a career, can you give us a sense of like how you started? Like, where'd you grow up? How did you get into all this? How did you become this? I mean, did you wake up one day and say, I'm going to be the best mass tort lawyer there is? Or how did this all happen?
No, I grew up in a blue-collar town, Colonia, New Jersey. I always think back now. We never knew our neighbors' politics. We never knew whether they were Republican or Democrat. We only knew if the guy next door was the baseball coach or not, and like those were different times. I went to law school, met my now wife there. I did a lot of chasing in law school. And I got out and I interviewed at I did okay in law school, so I interviewed at a few big white shoe firms. And I remember going to one firm in New York that I litigate against now. And after they were done interviewing me, I asked if I could speak to one of the associates. And they said, what are you talking about? No one ever does that. So I want to know actually what goes on here.
Yeah.
And on the way to see one of the associates, I saw a room with a bunch of cots. And I said, well, what's that for? They said, well, that's for the people who work through the night. So I asked the associate when I met with the associate, I'm like, well, tell me about the cots. He said, well, we have what they call the white shirt contest. You ever hear of this?
No.
I said, what's the white shirt contest? They said, well, if you work through the night, the secretary will bring you a new white shirt in the morning. And then there's a pool. And whoever has the most new white shirts at the end of the month wins the pool. And that's connected to the cot. I said, well, that's not for me. So
I'm picturing Mad Men. Don
So,
Draper.
right,
Secretary
exactly.
pulls out, open a drawer, gives him a shirt.
So I think some of that still goes on, by the way. So then I said, well, I don't think I want to do it. So I ended up going back home to Woodbridge, New Jersey, and started with the Willens firm. At that time, there were 31 lawyers. The heartbeat, I felt the heartbeat at the kind of close to mine. I met a lot of great people there. I had the fortune to work for a few Supreme Court justices while I was there who had retired. Some great lawyers. David Willens, who tried the Lindbergh case. I had a lot of nice conversations with him, so it was a nice
The
way to
Lindbergh
start.
was the kidnapping case?
The Lindbergh kidnapping case. And people say to me now, well, what are you doing? Are you going to ever retire? And I'm like, I don't know. I haven't worked a day in my life yet. And I said, I'm going to keep doing this, and as long as I can get up every day and help somebody, I'm going to keep doing it. And what happens if you stop? You know, right now, if somebody needs a doctor in Minnesota,
Yeah.
you can make 3 phone calls, and by the 3rd phone call, somebody's going to know somebody, right? So you know, the practice of law opens so many doors that people just don't have any sense until you're,
Yeah.
until you're in the middle of it. And, you know, I tell the young lawyers in our office that, you know, you're a lot of times you're the bridge in people's lives from one place to another. You may not be there for very long, but you're there. You're the bridge in their life from one place for another, maybe from life to death. And I've had those experiences. And, you know, I don't know that there's any, maybe medicine to some degree, at least in the old times, but I don't know many professions where you get that human experience and it never ends, you know, and it's deepens you.
You know, I grew up at the Jersey Shore, and I was, you know, I surf a lot. Like surfing's a big thing, kind of for me, like as an activity. And I remember I went to Catholic school my whole life, and I went to St. Catherine's School in Spring Lake, and I remember going back to school like in September, and it would just be the worst. I'd be sitting there, and it'd be a beautiful summer beach day, and I'm like there. And you'd think it'd be better because I was 3 blocks from the ocean, but it's actually worse because you can hear the ocean and you can smell it and everything. And so we would, as kids, we would take these pictures from Surfer magazine, you know. And we didn't have like a lot of money growing up and stuff. I was the youngest of 13 kids, so I never really.
Wow.
I never. Hey, Oscar, can you lower the air a little bit in the room? So I grew up the youngest of 13 kids, and so we never really went on trips or anything like that. And we would have Surfer magazine, and there would be these pictures of these like exotic tropical places, guys surfing and tan, and we would cut them out and put them on our books, and I would daydream, you know, on my books. And recently I've been spending a lot of time in Puerto Rico, and I'm actually living like, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm driving up to these places that I've dreamt about as a kid with these world-class surf breaks and everything. Yeah. And I think to myself, well, I guess I'll retire and this is it. And so I'd spend some time down there, maybe a week or two, and I would just kind of, you'd get anxiety, like, and I don't think I could ever retire. Number one, because I have to stay busy, I got to do it. But the second thing that you said is, like you said, in places there's a shortage of doctors, and so you're just going to retire and leave these people. Like I think in our profession, and you know, so people know, like our profession is we work on contingency. We represent kind of everyday people, middle class people against, you know, very powerful interests in the world, corporations, you know, pharmaceuticals, insurance companies. And people need us. And I thought one thing, like if I retired, like, you know, I'm in no way the best lawyer or anything, okay, in anything I do. Like I'm just another lawyer. We get good results. I think we do a great job for people. And I think that people need us. Like I remember when I was thinking about going to law school, people would say to me, why do you want to go to law school? There's too many lawyers. And I said, okay, and this was like in the 90s, okay, maybe there's too many lawyers, but are there too many good lawyers? And I also thought, like, that'd be like saying, there's too many businesses, you know, like, so don't go into business because there's too many businesses. Well, are there too many good businesses? So I think we like do a good job for people, and that's a big thing for me too. And when I think about retiring or slowing down, is people need us. Like every day we're getting phone calls. You know, I remember you talk about your personal experiences with being the bridge and telling the young lawyers about that. I had one case where this guy fell, he hit his head, he was blind, he was probably in his mid to late 40s. He didn't qualify for any government benefits. You know, another big firm had his case for some time and then said, sorry, we can't help you, there's nothing we can do. And I took the case. And we worked it up and ended up getting the guy like $2.5 million, which, you know, and it was an absolute lifesaver for the guy.
Right.
And when I think about doing defense work that I did when I first started out, working for insurance companies and getting the case dismissed, I didn't really have a client. Like the client didn't really care because the insurance company was paying for it. As far as the insurance adjuster, they're like, oh, great, whatever, just another case. And kind of along that kind of Rick Freeman talking to young lawyers about becoming a lawyer, what kind of lawyer do you want to become? I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever, but those big white shoe firms that you talked about, why do they call them white shoe firms? What is that?
I don't know.
It's something about
Black
white
hats,
shoes.
white shoes.
But by the way, that you have something in common with Jerry Spence. Did you know that? Almost the same.
I have short hair.
Almost the same exact story.
Yeah.
So I'm having this conversation with him, and I said, well, how did you get here? And he said, well, I was a defense lawyer, and I had a huge defense clientele, and one day I had a guy who was catastrophically injured, and I got a no cause. And then I was standing in line in the drugstore, and the guy was behind me in the drugstore. And I noticed him, and I said to him, I'm sorry. And the man who was in the wheelchair said, you don't have to be sorry, you were just doing your job. And Jerry Spence said to himself over and over again, I'm just doing my job? This is my job? And the next day, he went in and he told his partner he's never doing another defense case. He got rid of all of his insurance clients and he started from scratch. So you have your heart maybe beats a little bit like his.
I was telling you we were chatting before we started. I think
nice.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah.
Jerry Spence, Jerry Clark.
Yeah.
he's got better results than me, but
He's older.
We were talking before we kind of came on the podcast about like I think social media is terrible for society for so many ways. The kids are addicted to the phones. I'm addicted to my phone. It's just the worst. And frankly, that's why I like this podcast. 'Cause I don't bring the phone in, but the old media, these like short form, quick things brought to you by Pfizer and all this stuff. I think it's going by the wayside. Like when you hear about Robert Kennedy, if you look at the headlines of Robert Kennedy, oh, he's crazy, he's an anti-vaxxer, he's wacky this, wacky that. And I heard his long-form podcast on Joe Rogan, and I'm like, the guy's far from it. I mean, I'm reading his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and not to take sides or anything, but like he's got everything cited. And so what I hope to accomplish by this podcast too is because lawyers have been demonized a lot, the lawyer jokes. And then people may remember the McDonald's coffee cup case, where the coffee spilled and burnt the woman. And in my opinion, I think like corporate America over the years, they hire these big PR firms and let's demonize the lawyers. And really what you're doing is you're hurting people. So one of the things I want to get out with this podcast is what's the real side of lawyers and contingency lawyers, and what do we really do? And telling that story about Jerry Spence, it's like, I asked Mike Farrar this question, but like I said, Mike, I grew up Catholic. Mike Farrar is another great attorney, and I said, Mike, when we pass on and we go up in St. Peter's at the gate, is he going to be there with a checkbook, a clipboard saying you screwed these many people out of recoveries? I mean, is there a place for clearly there's a place for defense lawyers in society. Clearly, if someone's a murderer, they're entitled to a defense. So what's your view on all that? I mean, is it bad to be a defense lawyer? I mean, sure, there's plenty of good people that are defense lawyers, but...
And Chris,
and we kind of... Here's how it marks... Shut me up, Mark. Mark's going to shut me up. But here's how it... Thing. World War II, you're a German soldier. Is that German soldier a bad person? Or did they just wake up and say, go fight, and if you don't, we're going to shoot you? Like, what's the deal with all that?
Just going to put one more layer on this as well, if that's possible. Nah. So I saw your parents wanted you to be a dentist when you were growing up.
Right.
And you,
How'd you know that?
I do my homework. I talked to your parents. They were at Mr.
That's
Shrimp.
hysterical.
But your parents wanted you to be a dentist, and it looked like part of you wanting to become an attorney was you wanted to make a difference. And then obviously you get into this mass tort field, these asbestos cases, the things you're talking about. And do you feel like you've gotten to that point where you're making a difference? And then in the same confines that Jerry asked you, are you on the right side of things with what you're doing?
Well, you know, I always wanted to do environmental law. It just turned out to be something that kind of took off in various ways. You know, it's interesting. I get a significant percentage, I'm sure you do too, of cases from defense lawyers. I'm representing family members of defense lawyers. People have their jobs to do. But I'll tell you what. Probably the greatest thing I ever did in my legal career was after 9/11. And at that point, I was president of New Jersey Trial Lawyers on 9/11. And it was, you know, in New Jersey, it was a rough time, as you probably remember. And lawyers, defense lawyers, plaintiffs' lawyers, they rose to the occasion. You know, I worked for a full year. I think my partners want to shoot me. I worked for a full year pro bono on, you know, helped establish the Victims' Compensation Fund. And I saw lawyers travel from North Dakota, put their practices down, travel from North Dakota, set up shop in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
People coming in from Minnesota, all over the country, and never put their hand out. Thousands of lawyers, mostly plaintiffs' lawyers, but some defense lawyers too. And, you know, learned a lot from that experience. And so, you know, the plaintiff's lawyer's heart is pretty good.
Yeah.
What's the Victims' Compensation Fund? Like, tell people about that. What was your involvement in that, and how did that all come about?
There was a 9/11, when 9/11 hit, I remember the first thing we did is we went on air in New Jersey and through the American Association of Justice. And we said, okay, first we're going to do is we're going to have a moratorium on all lawsuits. Let's put lawsuits, let's not make this about lawsuits, let's make this about the families.
And you mean don't file lawsuits on behalf of victims
right.
against the airline or the
let's
building?
just not go there. There'll be a
Right.
time for that.
Right.
Let's not go there.
Right.
Let's see what we can do to help these people. And the American Association for Justice, and there were a lot of people involved. Ken Feinberg actually has a Netflix documentary on this now. And we went to Washington. We had multiple meetings with members of Congress and Senate, and they established a fund to compensate these families, first responders, people who were there. And that fund still exists today. Because unfortunately, people who are on those piles, with the latency of, it's terrible toxic. Think about having every major chemical in the world pulverized, but you saw the best of America. You know, it's hard to actually imagine where we are today and where we were then.
I could not
You know,
agree. Yeah.
you saw the best of America, but we saw the best of the legal field. People it didn't matter who you were, where you were from, and it was a wonderful thing, and it exists today. It still exists today. So it's a long legacy. And so I guess I'm a friend to all, I like to think I'm a friend to all lawyers. Some are a little bit hard to take at times.
Yeah.
They take it to an extreme. But, the plaintiff's lawyers are, I always say we go to these conferences and there's 1,000 plaintiff's lawyers and people say, I said, but you know what? You go to these conferences and there's some piece of every lawyer there whose heart beats the same way.
Yeah.
And it's kind of,
Yeah.
energizing in a certain way. You're very different in a lot of ways, but,
I look at like each one of your, I was about to call them your little cases, but I look at the, cases you have listed out that you've worked on. And Jerry started out talking to you about the Ciba-Geigy case down in Toms River. I see. All right, that ends in a $38.5 million settlement. It looks like it's the largest settlement in behalf of individuals in New Jersey. Which, so again, you talk about making a difference, and Jerry's a young attorney. Obviously, you made an impression on him, seeing you do that. And same thing, the class action cases I've been involved in, I feel like the people on the consumer side, the plaintiff side, it's a different caliber of attorney. You have to rise to that occasion. You have to really bring it because you're going against these giant corporations. It's this big, like David versus Goliath kind of mentality. So, you talk about 9/11. That's something all Americans know about. In the Ciba-Geigy case down in Toms River, that's something that impacted a ton of people in different ways. So you look at this $38.5 million settlement, and really, like, what's that for? Like, what did that go to, and why was the settlement as big of a number as it was?
Well, back then it was to compensate people who had lost children. It was probably in present day money, it would be significantly more. We had a medical monitoring fund established for 30 years, so people who were exposed would make sure they got the proper medical care and with the right experts, so they could catch cancer early, And I like to think that one of the things we do, and yes, we change people's lives, but sometimes we have the chance to change America. And, look at all the changes that the civil justice system has brought to this country for the better. People drive safe cars now. The cars are safer. Computers are safer. You can almost look at anything and say, somehow, the justice system had an impact on that. And, so I guess I'm a true believer.
How does it do it, though? I mean, how does the justice system change stuff? Are you going in front of a judge and saying, make them do this or change that? Like, how, so people understand, like, how has this changed? And how have kind of powerful interests try to prevent us from changing it? If you can talk about that a little bit.
Well, sometimes it's like fighting a small country or even a big country. One of the case, I started this Talc case in 2009. People say, oh, look at all the money. I litigated that case for 10 years before that case ultimately resolved. So you really have to believe in it's not about the money. People think it's about the money. You don't stay in these things for the money, because there's a lot of ways you could put time in and make money. You don't wait 10 years to get paid, as
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So, it's
Tell us about the Talc case, though, so everyone knows. Like, what was it? What's the...
I was going to say, because we sit in this room, the three of us know what you're talking about with talc and stuff, but...
Well, this was actually a crazy case, and it was really kind of the beginning. So it was a mesothelioma death case. Well, the woman was still alive at the time. She was lived in Monmouth County, and she was a young woman. She was in her 40s, kids, and she had mesothelioma. And for the life of me, I'm trying to figure out how she was exposed.
What's mesothelioma?
It's a cancer of the lining of the lung that's only caused by asbestos exposure, period.
What's asbestos? How does that cause that? I mean,
It's a mineral that comes from the ground. It was once called the magic mineral. It was in almost everything. Now we know it was even in makeup and talcum powder and joint compound, brakes, insulation, siding, you name it.
was it in crayons?
There was even in crayons for a while.
Yeah.
It was, it was a binder. And so I'm trying to come up with, where did this woman get exposed?
So because I was at a firm that did some asbestos, some asbestos. I never actually worked on it. It's microscopic fibers. You breathe it in. It gets implanted in the cells in the lungs, and it makes little tiny cuts of the tissue.
When it becomes airborne, right?
Well, it comes to be airborne, and now we know it can even be absorbed through the ovaries for people who are using it, on the perineal surfaces. But they're microscopic fibers. You can't see them. They get deposited in the lung, and over time, it overcomes your immune system. And not everybody, but some people get very sick, and it's terminal. So this poor woman had mesothelioma, and I'm like, how am I going to help this woman? So I came up with this theory that she got it from her father, who was a lab technician at Engelhard in Menlo Park, New Jersey. And because he used asbestos gloves and he used this asbestos block. And my theory was that when she visited her father at work, she somehow must have got exposed that way. So I'm taking the father's deposition. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, by the way.
Oftentimes.
I'm taking the father's deposition. And the father's a company guy. He's a scientist. He loves his daughter, but he's a company guy through and through. And I'm like, okay. And I'm asking him the questions. Did you use this? Yes. Did Donna come in? And it turns out she grew up literally a half a mile from me in Colonia. I didn't know that at the time. And I said, was Donna there? Did this happen? Did this happen? And I'm done with my examination, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll live to fight another day. But maybe not. It was a close call. Then the defense lawyer starts asking the guy questions. The scientist that was his client, or her client. They said, well, Mr. Swanson, let's just talk about the products you used in the laboratory. Let's start with the talc. That didn't have asbestos in it, right? And he puts his head up and he looks at the other lawyer and he says, yes, it did. And he puts his head down.
So wait, this is the deposition of the husband of your...
No, the father.
The father of your client.
Right.
That worked in the lab and...
Right.
Okay, got it.
So they said, the defense lawyer says, no, Mr. Swanson, I'm not talking about the products that Mr. Placitella asked you about, the gloves. I'm asking about the talc. That didn't have asbestos in it, did it? He says, yeah, it did. And he puts his head back down. Now he says, Mr. Swanson, you said the talc had asbestos in it. How do you know that? He says, I did the test. He puts his head back down. I said, no, Mr. Swanson. Well, you did the test. Where are the test results? He says, they don't exist. What do you mean they don't exist? Now, this is the guy cross-examining his own client. He says, well, after we got the test results back, I was told to put all the stuff outside my door by the legal department, and I never saw the tests again, and they closed the mine down next month. Now, I'm saying, you might think, wow. I'm saying, oh, no. Yeah. My case is going right down the tubes, right? That they're going to make this guy out to be a nut.
Yeah.
So I start sending subpoenas out.
Question, though.
Right.
If this is the father of your plaintiff,
Right.
but was he a defendant in the case?
No.
But he's just a rep of the company.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
He's
So
just-
so he's being represented by the company, even
Right.
though he's related to the plaintiff.
Right. Right.
Got it.
So
Okay.
he's there, and so I'm like, now I got to go figure this out because how am I going to help this family? So I start sending subpoenas out all over the place, and this is what I learned. Now this case was 2009. This was the crazy part. Back in 1981, there was a case in Rhode Island brought by a young lawyer right out of school. It was an industrial talc case. The guy worked in a rubber factory. And
Is this, by the way, is this story you're telling, is this what started the talc litigation we're talking about?
yeah,
Wow.
so
But just and
well,
so
maybe
everyone,
not. This is what you're going to hear.
And so everyone knows this talc litigation is
It's huge.
It's
Yeah, like
huge.
nationwide.
So I find out that there was a case that was started in 1978 by this man who had mesothelioma in this rubber factory in Rhode Island. So I travel up to Rhode Island, I look in the records, and what do I find out? Yeah, they took depositions in that case. The scientist that my guy worked for, my client's father worked for, was deposed.
wow.
He said under oath that they found asbestos in the talc, in the mines. The geologist who worked for the company also was deposed. He found asbestos in the mines. And then what happened? They settled the case with the condition that the plaintiff's lawyer had to turn all the evidence back over to the defense firm and never talk about it again.
That's terrible.
How were you able to recreate a 30-something-year-old case?
And just digging through files and
Yeah.
sending out subpoenas.
It's on my desk.
So what do I find out? I find out that over the course of the 1980s and into the 90s, thousands of people brought talc cases in industrial plants, thinking that talc had asbestos in it, in addition to the insulation that was in the plants. And every one of those cases were dismissed. Why? Because the same lawyers who sat in the depositions, while the scientist was under oath and said, I found asbestos, threatened those lawyers, saying there was no evidence of asbestos in the talc. And thousands of lawyers were dismissed, thousands of cases were dismissed under the representation that no evidence existed. So at that point, I always say that I will not, because it happens over and over again, and I know you do this in your practice, I will not sign a
Right.
confidentiality order.
Right.
I will not sign a secrecy order,
Yeah.
because guess what? If the truth was not buried back in the 1970s,
Thousands of lives.
thousands of lives would have been different. So, and this is what we do as lawyers.
Yeah.
You could talk about the Pinto case. I mean, the same thing is repeated over and over and over again. Sexual abuse cases, right?
yeah.
That's why we now have
The church sexual abuse cases. Yeah.
That's why, because those cases were the cases were swept under the rug, confidentiality. Now you can't do it anymore. There's actually a law that says you can't do it anymore in sexual abuse cases. Right? You can still do it in other kinds of cases. So I always say when I'm in court and they present me with a protective order,
Yeah.
I'm not signing that. So judge, if you make me sign it, then I guess I have to sign it. But I'm not doing that on my own. I don't care how it's going to expedite things. And, So that's how it started,
Wow.
you know. And that case took more than a decade
Yeah.
to resolve.
And she passed away during that time period as well.
She passed away, but her kids were taken care of. I'm still friendly with her husband.
Wow.
And from that case, so what then we ended up doing is we actually then brought a case in federal court in New Jersey to give all the people whose cases were dismissed their rights back. And that case was litigated for, I think, 12 years. And ultimately, that case settled.
Wow.
And a lot of those families were gone. You know, it was their kids or their grandkids, but but at least they knew at some point, you know, justice was done.